Okay. Wow, there's a lot less people in here than I thought there was before.
Lots of angels, though.
Yeah.
Lots of angels.
So good morning, everybody. And I want to start out with just a quick prayer. So if you bow your heads, Lord, I just thank you for this opportunity to share my testimony, Lord, your story. Father God, let the words that come out of my mouth be the words that you would have me say.
Yes.
That all the glory of what I'm about to share would go to you, Lord.
Yes.
That there's nothing in what I'm about to share that I can take any credit for, Lord.
Yes.
That this is just a sharing of your story and how you've worked through different situations in my life, Lord. We just give you the praise and the honor and the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So, that better? Okay. I'm not used to using a microphone, so. About me. I've given my testimony a couple different times in the past, and I've always focused pretty much solely on the story behind how Charlotte and I started our family. I know as we've kind of been going around and sharing all of our testimonies to learn more about each other in our church body, I wanted to include a little bit about me and where I came from. So I grew up in a very small town, actually a village of Manhattan, Illinois, which Charlotte loves to laugh at me because I came from a village. Manhattan, Illinois is a small little town about 30 miles south of Chicago, near Joliet, Illinois, Kankakee, Illinois. Might be some towns that people have heard of before, but population of about 2,000, maybe 2,500 people. Little farm town. Pretty normal upbringing. Dad worked at a factory, worked 12-hour days, every ounce of overtime that he could. I'm one of 5 kids. I'm number 4 out of 5. Mom stayed home, took care of us kids, made sure that we, had everything that we wanted that they could give us growing up. We weren't rich, but we definitely could have been way more poor. As far as church, I remember going to church as a kid. My grandmother, my mom's mom, extremely dedicated to her church. My grandfather, on my dad's side, my dad's dad, he was extremely involved in his church. He would go on missions trips, he'd come back with a stack of slide reels, and he'd come over to the house, he'd set up his screen, and he would proceed with 3 hours of slides from his mission trip to, I think it was Nicaragua, different places in Central America. We didn't really go to church all the time. I remember going to Sunday school when I was very little, being kind of number 4 out of 5 kids. I think there was a lot of, things with the church that my mom and dad didn't really, it's always a hassle. We gotta get everybody there. And my oldest sister, when she started working, and my brother started working, and everyone had their own schedules, and it was just hectic. We kind of never really went. We went at Christmas time, and we'd go at Easter time. We would go up and visit my grandmother's church. So I was around church, had a lot of knowledge up in my head. A lot of questions. Figured, I know about God, I'm good. And that's kind of how I went through most of my childhood. I had some really good influences that God put in my path as a kid. One of them was one of my best friends, Adam McHugh. He actually now is a youth pastor at a church up in Ohio. I believe he lives in Ohio now. But he lived a couple houses down from me, and we were pretty much inseparable because we lived so close. The other one, my friend Matt McClure, he lived about a 2-mile bicycle ride on gravel roads past cornfields. He lived out on a farm. So I would ride my bicycle 2 miles out to his house. And his family went to church. They went to, I think it was called Faith Bible. It was kind of a non-denominational Christian church. he went to Awanas. They talked about going to Awanas. I really didn't know what that was, other than it was some sort of youth group. And you know, they had a really strong influence on me, and I didn't realize it at the time. So I kind of considered myself, I guess, kind of dormant when it comes to church for a long, long time. And it wasn't until looking back and asking God, you know, God, when did I actually get saved? You know, a lot of people, they have stories of, oh, you know, this defining moment in time when they reached out for the Lord and He just delivered them, and it was just like a light switch. And I never really felt like I had that moment. And it took a long time, and finally I started remembering things from my childhood. And I can distinctly remember a time when my friend Adam, we were outside playing, and it had to have been a Wednesday because he always went to church on Wednesdays, because he had to leave. And I'm like, it's not dark out yet, man. We don't have to go inside. The street lights aren't on. But he had to leave to go to church, and he was all excited because he was getting baptized. I'm like, what's that? What do you mean? You know, I'm like, I was already baptized. You know, they sprinkled the water, and we're good. And so he kind of explained to me and told me, he's like, well, you know, you need to ask God to forgive your sins. So I can remember going home and going into my bedroom and getting down on my knees and praying to God and asking Him to forgive my sins. I don't remember, I'm somewhere around 3rd or 4th grade, because Adam moved to another town in 5th grade, so it had to be, I mean, it was early. But I was like, okay, I remember feeling this weird, you know, kind of tingly feeling like it was something different. But other than that, I'm like, okay, well, now what, you know? Nothing really changed. But I really believe, looking back, that that's the moment when God saved me. I went through most of my school. I was always, you know, a good student. I had friends. I was never really extroverted. To get up and do what I'm doing right now would absolutely freak me out. You know, it was like 2 weeks of worry over giving a 5-minute speech in English class. I had my close friends from my childhood. Through high school, I never really had any relationships, never had any girlfriends, it was always just focus on my studies, what I'm going to do, my career. Never really had any relationships or anything like that. Once I finished high school, started working, going to school, I got hired doing my first job doing drafting work, which is what I do now in my career. And my boss, he's like, oh man, you know, so you need to get a webcam. He's like, oh, people do crazy things online. So I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna buy one of these web cameras and I'm gonna go online, and there's a program called NetMeeting, and you can pull up a list of people and you just double click on a name and it tries to connect you. And if the other person hits accept, boom, you're connected. So I was not expecting to meet my wife, but one of the first few that answered the phone on the other end was my wife and her roommate. And you know, it's amazing how you can have one intention in your head, and if God, you can't stop God's plans in your life.
Amen.
You can try to do whatever you're going to do, and He will change things. He will put people in your path. He will have you do things that you don't even realize He's having you do until you look back. And a lot of my testimony, you know, because my childhood, aside from that, it really was pretty ordinary. I was into remote control cars, I was into riding four-wheelers, I was into going fishing. I spent most of my time with my older brother and my older cousins. You know, my cousins were like brothers to me. My dad's twin brother, my uncle and my aunt, they called me their orphan, because if I wasn't at home, I was at their house. I wasn't hanging out with my friends, getting in trouble. You know, I wasn't out drinking and you know, running around and doing all those things. It was always more involved with family.
Amen.
So God gives me Charlotte. We start talking online for, 4 or 5 hours a night from, I think it was in February all the way through August. In August, we finally arranged. She had moved down to Florida because her parents were in Florida. She was in Virginia going to Liberty University at the time. And so she was going back up to Virginia to visit her friends. That was about a 12-hour drive for her from the Chicago area to Virginia is about a 12-hour drive for me. So now I'm faced with the task of, okay, how do I share this with my family? They're not going to understand. But I really felt God was, one of the first things that she kind of talked to me about is like, if we're going to be in a relationship, where do you stand with God? And that's when some of those dots started connecting. Because my answer to that question initially was, well, I haven't really done anything bad, so I'm going to heaven, right? And, so Charlotte really kind of started fostering my relationship with the Lord. So we arranged, we meet up in Virginia. I can't remember if it was a full week off of work. And met up with her, some of her friends. I attended her church that she was going to in Virginia. And I think I even called my boss and told him I was going to need a few extra days off because I was going to stay in Virginia a little bit longer. Go back. This is where things really kind of started flying fast and crazy. It was October when I flew down. This is 2001. Right after 9/11 happened and everything.
Whoa.
I flew down to Florida to meet Charlotte's parents. And they were the most accepting. I stayed at their house in their spare bedroom. So here's this guy that their daughter met online that they don't even know. That's going to fly from Chicago down to Orlando. And they're just like, yeah, stay at our house, I'm like, how? That's crazy. But I stayed there, and I knew that if this relationship was going to work, to give this a shot, I had to move to Florida. Charlotte had moved to Florida by that time. So in October of 2001, with no job, I had about 3 months worth of my truck payments and my cell phone bills in the bank that I could pay bills for about 3 months. I packed up a little U-Haul. Charlotte flew up to Chicago, met my family, and then we drove the U-Haul down. I moved to Florida. I was living with Charlotte's mom and dad in their spare bedroom. So obviously this creates a lot of, I thought it was crazy. But when I tried to kind of break up our entire relationship, I'm like, no, this isn't right. I can't do this. I'm not talking to you anymore. This goes against everything. My entire family is up in Illinois. And it was like heart-wrenching. I couldn't. It's like the next day, I'm like, honey, are we good? So October of 2001, I moved down to Florida. And November, we get engaged. By March of 2002, we're planning this wedding. I have no idea if my family is all going to show up. I know my parents are going to come, my brothers and sisters. Even though I know there was a lot of resentment, I just took off, like, fast. And
I get it.
You can't explain when God's telling you to do something. Sometimes you just have to react.
Yeah.
And it's scary. And it doesn't make sense. And you look back on it and you don't know if you're doing the right thing or if you're not doing the right thing. But in March of 2002, I'm at work. All of a sudden, I started having pain in my chest. Well, that's weird. We already had plans to go with Charlotte's parents to go to Lowe's. They had a mobile home they were fixing up to sell. needed help getting supplies. So I go to Lowe's, we're moving around rolls of carpet, and man, I was sick to my stomach, my chest was still hurting. I just don't feel right. And Charlotte's mom's like, you need to go to the emergency room. I'm like, no, I'll be fine. No, you're going to the emergency room. So they take me over to Florida Hospital in Orange City. By, I think it was 2 in the morning, they finally ruled out any heart problems, and my left lung was 30% collapsed.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, what did I do? And the doctor said, well, you're tall and you're thin. Now, I was about 60 or 70 pounds lighter than I am right now, so I was very skinny. They said it's a spontaneous pneumothorax, collapsed lung. It's very rare, but when it does happen, it's usually tall, thin men. So I'm like, okay, well, what are you gonna do? He's like, well, we gotta put a chest tube in, and you gotta stay in the hospital for a few days. And I'm thinking, whoa, time out. Wait, surgery? What are my options? I'm supposed to ask for my options, right? That's what you're supposed to do, to get another opinion. And I'm like, what happens if I don't do this? He's like, well, eventually you'll keep breathing, air will keep leaking into your chest, it'll put pressure on your heart, you'll have a heart attack, you'll probably die. So I said, okay, let's do the chest tube. So, I've always kind of had a sense of humor, even though I keep it under wraps quite a bit. I can still remember talking to, Josh is laughing right there. Remember talking to the nurse, there was a male nurse that was helping the ER doctor put the chest tube in, and they have this round tube that they're putting in through my ribs, and they have to puncture it into your chest cavity. And the doctor was almost pushing me off the side of the table, so the male nurse was on the other side holding me on the table. It sounded like you put a needle through a basketball when it finally punched into my chest cavity. And the doctor, he was yelling for he didn't have the right kit. I'm like, well, don't you have any duct tape? And he's like, I've never had somebody with this sense of humor. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, you're getting a chest tube put in. But I go through all of this, and looking back on that whole situation, one thing that happened, I did call home. I knew my dad, he worked nights, he was going to get home from work about midnight Central Time. So it's 2 in the morning Eastern Time, so I'm like, he's probably home from work, showered, he might not be asleep yet. So I call home. I'm like, Mom, Dad, I'm in the hospital. I have a collapsed lung. Now, my mom will not fly. She flew once as a kid, she hated it. She doesn't like airplanes, she doesn't like flying. She almost got on an airplane. Instead, they got up the next morning and they started heading to Florida. I had no idea. But I really think God may have used this situation to bring my parents to meet Charlotte's parents before we got married.
Amen.
I haven't had any trouble since. I can't get my scuba certification, which was on my bucket list, so I'm bummed about that. But God's got different plans. He's not supposed to be diving, apparently. But he does these different things. And I didn't have medical insurance at the time. I was working as a contractor for Progress Energy in the drafting department, had no insurance, was off work, had $7,000 to $8,000 worth of medical bills, no way to pay them, really. And that really triggered me to start realizing, hey, I'm getting married. I need some insurance. I need some benefits. I need to start looking for a different job. And I talked to my employer and I told them, hey, can you bring me on full time? And they weren't able to. They didn't have a position in the organizational chart for me. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to keep looking. And if I find something, I'll let you know. And I actually found the position that I still have now, or the company that I still have now. That company has been, I've been very blessed with my employer.
Right.
It's had its challenges, but they've always taken care of me, financially. There's always been something, a bonus, a profit sharing bonus. All of a sudden they started giving profit sharing bonuses at a time when we desperately, and I'll get to that if I don't keep dragging on, when we would desperately need something, all of a sudden it would show up.
Amen.
And if I didn't have that happen and start looking for another employer that I could have benefits, I wouldn't have been at that job. If I wasn't at that job, I wouldn't have been able to get those bonuses that they started giving right at the time when we needed it, fast forwarding 10 years. So we started attending church in Deltona, and I would always hear people give their testimony, and there's a lot of people that go through some extremely horrible, dark trials in their life. And I've seen cousins of mine that have struggled and still struggle with addiction and alcohol. You know, one of my cousins threatened to kill his own mother. My sister struggled with depression, bipolar. I had always felt like I don't really have this strong testimony, God. I'm like, I kind of was just, I saw what my older siblings were going through. I saw what, I came from a big family. I saw my cousins, and I saw them, you know, getting DUIs and going out on binges. And I stayed away from all that stuff. I was learning kind of their lessons. So I'm like, what's my powerful story? You know, I don't have like a wow, this is amazing story. And one of the guys at church is like, well, you know, just be patient. God will build you a testimony. And he did. From the first onset of our relationship, Charlotte had told me she wanted to have like 5 kids. She's one of 7, I'm one of 5. She's like, I want 5 kids. It freaked me out a little bit. I said, I want as many kids as I can afford. I have to provide, okay? So ease up with this 5 kids thing. We'll see how this happens. So, you know, we're being responsible. We built a house, got married. After about a year, we're like, okay, let's start trying to start a family. This is easy, right? This is the thing. All through your teen years, your high school years, you know, never have unprotected sex. Always, you know, take all these precautions and things. That's what the world tells you to do, because this happens like this. And you look around you and see people having children that they don't want. And we did everything the right way. And nothing was happening. So this was really a lesson in patience. It took us over 2 years before we conceived. We were on the prayer list at church for a long time. And in January of 2005, God answered our prayers.
Amen.
And Charlotte became pregnant. This was right on the same time that my grandmother up in Illinois passed away. And we had to make that trip to Illinois. We had no idea. And I can remember talking to some of my cousins and things like that. And like, oh, you know, when are you having kids? We're like, well, you know, I don't know. You know, we're trying. We didn't know that she was pregnant at that time. Pregnancy started out great. No morning sickness. Hey, this is awesome. Everyone, like, first 3 months are horrible. Charlotte was fine. I can't remember what we flew up to Illinois for, but on the flight back, we had a lot of turbulence. It was my cousin's wedding, yes, Tiffany's wedding, which was end of April 23rd, I think. A lot of turbulence. Charlotte filled, I think, 3 or 4 of those little bags in the airplane. Figured, okay, well, you know, she's pregnant. She's 3 months pregnant, you know, 3.5 months pregnant. Little did we know that was the start of a downward spiral. That, I mean, it was just down, 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 down. Charlotte was diagnosed eventually with a sickness called hyperemesis. Hyperemesis is basically extreme morning sickness. She couldn't eat anything. She couldn't drink anything without getting sick. She couldn't drink water without getting sick. All the little home remedies, you know, candied ginger and these little lollipops, everything that was supposed to help you to be able to keep your food down wasn't working. She ended up in DeLand at the hospital, hospitalized for an entire week because she was so dehydrated. She had lost 20 pounds. So here, you know, we prayed for God to start us a family, and now why all these trials? What's going on? Why? Why, God? I don't understand. Why do we have to go through this? I just didn't get it. After the 1 week in the hospital, they said, well, we're gonna send her home, but she's gonna need to be on IVs for another week. And I'm like, what? How's that gonna work? How am I gonna pay for this? I can't do this. I gotta go to work. She's on IVs. So they teach me how to flush out her IV, to change the IV bags. All of a sudden now I'm this home nurse. You know, there was somebody that came to the house and set things up. But she was on IV fluid at home for a week. So that was one round of, okay, that's a week in the hospital, that's one stay, and that was up in DeLand, Florida Hospital in DeLand. And those medical bills start to show up, as they do. Not only for the hospital, but the doctors and the home health company, and everyone wants their money. The IV fluids wasn't enough. It helped her out a little bit. She ended up on a medication called Zofran. It's a medication that they give to cancer patients for nausea when they're going through chemo. The little dissolvable tablets was not enough. So she had to be on a pump. It was like an insulin pump. So one syringe would last, it was a continuous infusion for 24 hours to the cost of $380 per day. Now, mind you, we still had 5 months of pregnancy to go through. My insurance covered the first month, and then when we went to re-up the prescription, they denied it. So we had to jump through hoops to finally get the insurance company to approve, because they're like, no, she shouldn't have to be on that. So the doctor would have to call, explain the situation, get them to approve to pay for this medication. So our prayers were very much focused on Charlotte's health, the baby's health, and our finances. I'm freaking out about how am I going to pay all these bills. Jumping forward to August 30th of 2005. Starts out day like every other day. I go to work. Lunchtime comes. I leave my cell phone, which was not one of these awesome, cool smartphones. It was a Nokia phone. We didn't have texting. We couldn't afford to put texting on our plan, so it made phone calls. So I left it at my desk. I go to the break room. I eat my lunch. I come back to my desk, and that's usually when I would call Charlotte, see how she's doing. Excuse me. I get back to my desk, and I had missed a call, like at 12:08. So well, that's weird. Why did she call me? I always call her when I'm done eating. So I call her back. No answer. That's weird. Call her back a couple more times. 1 o'clock rolls around. I gotta get back to work. I stopped, called her a couple more times throughout the day. She never answered the phone. So I remember having a conversation with one of our engineers at the office, and he's like, oh, how's it going? You know, I was like, oh, he's like, when's your wife due? Like, oh, the end of October, October 20th, you know, we're getting close. A couple more months. I leave. At 5:10, as I'm driving, I call our neighbor next door, Amy. And I'm like, Amy, is my truck in the driveway? Because my truck was at home, Charlotte used that. I was driving her little Geo Prism because it got a lot better gas mileage. I'm like, is the truck in the driveway? She's like, yeah, it's been there all day. I'm like, I can't get a hold of Charlotte. So she's like, do you want me to go check on her? I said, yeah, go check on her. I'm like, I'm going to try to call some of the people from the church. It was a Thursday. Was it a Tuesday or a Thursday? It was a Tuesday. We had worship team practice on Tuesday. Charlotte sings, I run sounds. So Tuesday nights, we're at church for a few hours practicing. So I called Gail Main, hey, you know, if you're hanging out with Charlotte today, like maybe someone came over to the house, picked her up, and they went and, you know, got their nails done. I don't know, something. I'm trying to rationalize everything. I have a solution for this. I can figure out what's going on. There's a logical reason for this. No. No one had talked to her, no one was with her, and my neighbor calls me back, and she said the door's locked, but she could hear noise in the house. She's like, do you want me to try to break into the house? So I said, yeah. So my neighbor was able to open up our garage door, break into our house through the garage into the kitchen, find Charlotte completely unresponsive, having seizures in the living room. Now mind you, this is 5:30, quarter after 5. She tried calling me at noon and never answered the phone. God knows what was going on between noon and 5 o'clock. There's no other explanation for it. But as you look back on things, how was my neighbor able to break into my house so easily? We don't have a garage door opener on our garage. Our garage is kind of like a storage unit. We don't park our cars in there. It's piled full of junk. But I always kept it locked. So how was she able to break in? If that thing was locked, there's no way she's just going to lift up our 2-car garage door. Well, the Lord revealed to me as I started recalling back on all this, the first time I shared my testimony, I had cut the grass sometime the week before, that weekend before. In the middle of cutting the grass, it started one of these Florida rain showers, pouring down rain. So I finished cutting the grass, I pulled the lawnmower into the thing, I shut the door, and I ran in the house. I never locked it. Not only that, our air handler unit for our air conditioner is right next to the door when you come from our kitchen out into the garage. Something that I do that, she's already laughing at me. I'll do something around the house. I need a screwdriver. I'll go out to the garage and get a screwdriver, and since there's so much junk in our garage, it's a pain to get all the way over to my workbench to get the screwdriver. So when I'm done, I'm trying to wrap up. So apparently I just set the screwdriver on the little shelf next to the air handler unit. That screwdriver was laying there for my neighbor when she got into the garage and got up to the front, to the door. She pops the lock open, gets into the kitchen. But still, how many people would know how to jimmy a lock with a screwdriver that's laying there? Unless her husband just happened to have worked for a door and window company. He sells cars now and had at that time, but she knew exactly how to break into the house. Now, they weren't our original neighbors. When we built our house, there was another young couple that had a young child. We kind of hit it off with them. We were friends with them. And then all of a sudden, after a year, they moved away. And we're like, man, we don't have any good friends. And here these people moved away. And, Amy and Dave and little David, they moved in next door. But Amy knew exactly how to get into the house, and she didn't hesitate. So she breaks into the house. The alarm's going off like crazy. When the alarm goes off, of course, the police show up, the fire department shows up. And, I don't see any of this stuff as being coincidental. I think God does things in our lives. Now, I'm not saying that, have a messy garage. It's God's plan. But sometimes the things that we don't even realize, we're busy for whatever reason. Why didn't I take that screwdriver all the way over and put it away? I was in a hurry to do something. Regardless of the situation, God he puts little things in your path. It does little things that come back. So Charlotte's in the house. She's not responsive. She's having seizures. Got breathing very shallow. I'm still on I-4 right now, mind you. I'm driving home, trying not to freak out. Thinking to myself, when I get up to Sanford, if I get across that bridge and it's backed up, I'll be driving up that median. I have to get home. I have to get there to be with Charlotte. I don't know what's going on. So they put the EMT on the phone. I talked to the EMT, and he's like, what's this thing going to her leg? Is she diabetic? I said, no, she's got hyperemesis. It's to keep her nausea down. So they said, well, we're going to have to transport her. And he said, the closest hospital is Fish. I said, they don't deliver babies at Fish. Well, we don't know where we're going to take her yet, so we'll let you know. So I said, okay.